Welcome back to Exodus chapter 12 today. This chapter is probably in the top 5 list for most important chapters in all of the Bible, so it's a big one today. Just got back from church and we were just talking about the weather that we've been having and how in our lives we're either coming out of a storm, in the middle of a storm, or that there's a storm on the horizon. And we're going to see with the nation of Israel that they've been going through storm for 400 years, and now God is moving and going to direct them. But for all of us, everyone involved, the Israelites or us, God is always involved, and no matter what we're going through, we're headed in a direction, and there is an end destination. We just need to stay faithful and perseverant, and we will get there. So verse 1. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you." As we're about to see, this is a reference to keep record of the first ever Passover, which would mark a new age in the history of Israel. This month is called Abib, which literally means fresh young ears of barley, which was when barley was to be harvested around March or April. With a new calendar, the Israelites were to receive a new identity as the favored people of the true God. Verse 3, "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's households, a lamb for each household. Now if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them, according to what each man should eat. You are to divide the lamb." Verse 5, "Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Any flaw would render it unfit to represent a pure, wholesome sacrifice given to Yahweh." Verse 6, "You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat." The lintel was like the door frame on top. This prefigured the substitutionary death of Christ as a sacrificial lamb without blemish or defect. Verse 8, "They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs." Bitter herbs signified sorrow or grief, likely for past sin. The bread without yeast symbolized their needing to leave quickly. Verse 9, "Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs along with its entrails." Eating raw meat was a pagan practice. Verse 10, "And you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." Or in other words, eat up quickly, because right after you eat, you're going to have to get out of Dodge here. Verse 12, "For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord." God's referring to false pagan gods here. Verse 13, "The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." Verse 14, "Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel," meaning separated from the covenant rights and privileges, possibly resulting in death. This is specifically targeted at these Hebrews pre-Christ. There was a high importance on remembering this event. Verse 16, "On the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the 7th day. No work at all shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you." Verse 17, "You shall also observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread, until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is an alien or a native of the land. You shall not eat anything leavened. In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. All right, the significance of unleavened bread in the Bible has to do with this Passover event and with sin. Since the children of Israel left Egypt hastily, they did not have time for the bread to rise. So it was made on that very first Passover without leaven, also known as yeast. In describing this bread and why it was eaten, the Bible informs us of the following. Do not eat it with bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, so that all the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. And that's from Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3. In the Bible, leaven is almost always symbolic of sin. Like leaven that permeates the whole lump of dough, sin will spread in a person, a church, a nation, eventually overwhelming and bringing its participants into bondage and eventually death. And we see that in Galatians chapter 5, verse 9. Romans chapter 6, 23 tells us that the wages of sin is death, which is God's judgment for sin, and this is the reason that Christ died, to provide a way out of this judgment for sin if man will repent of his sins, accept Christ as his Passover sacrifice, and have his heart changed so that he can conform his life to what God commands. All right, back to verse 21. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. Verse 24. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. And now Christ is our Passover. Verse 25. When you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, What does this rite mean to you? You shall say, It is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes. And the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. Verse 29. Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go, worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go, and bless me also. Verse 33. The Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We will all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. Hence the situation with the unleavened bread. Verse 35. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And we're going to see that a lot of these articles that they got will be involved in the building of the tabernacle in the chapters to come. Verse 37. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. So think about that for a second. 600,000 men, not including the women and children. I mean, that's a caravan there. Verse 38. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. They baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened, since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Verse 42. It is a night to be observed for the Lord, for having brought them out from the land of Egypt. This night is for the Lord, to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout their generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner is to eat of it, but every man's slave purchased with money, after you have circumcised him, then he may eat of it. So additional regulations given for the holding of the Passover contained prohibitions on any uncircumcised foreigner, stranger, or hired servant being a valid participant. To partake of this meal, non-Israelites had to be like a native of the land. This leads us to believe that some of the Egyptians accompanied the departing nation. These may have been some of the troublemakers with whom Moses had to deal with when we get to the book of Numbers. Verse 45. A sojourner or a hired servant shall not eat of it. Obviously referring to the Passover meal. Verse 46. It is to be eaten in a single house. You are not to bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. And as is stated in the book of John, Jesus had no bones broken during the crucifixion events. All right, verse 47. All the congregation of Israel are to celebrate this. But if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near to celebrate it. And he shall be like a native of the land. But no uncircumcised person may eat of it. The same law shall apply to the native as to the stranger who sojourns among you. And we discussed the meaning and significance of circumcision back in Genesis chapter 17. So if you want to review that, just do a YouTube search under Bible MC Genesis 17, and it will come up. Verse 50. Then all the sons of Israel did so. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that same day, the Lord brought the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. All right, so the journey begins here with the new nation of Israel moving forward. Please join me tomorrow for chapter 13, and looking forward to it. God bless you.